Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It is wonderful to have you here for another episode of the show. And in this episode, I wanted to talk to you about scaling your practice. Now, scaling your practice is something that we've been helping dentists do for years now. And the whole idea of scaling your practice, of course, is so that you can create leverage in your practice and you can earn more money, work less hours, and have that great lifestyle balance that you're looking for, so that work-life balance that everyone is looking for. And of course, it's really important to think about scaling your practice in the context of the stages of growth of a dental practice. And there's really 4 stages of growth. Those 4 stages are the initial launch of the practice, that startup phase. Then there's the practice growth stage, where we're really focusing on developing strong cash flow. Then there's the scaling up stage, and then ultimately there's the exit stage when you divest yourself of the asset. Usually that comes with retirement, or it could be that you dispose of the asset for many other reasons. Now, before we get into this conversation, if scaling up is something that you're really interested and really fascinated about, then I'm going to encourage you to think about booking yourself in for a practice growth call with us. All you need to do is go to savvydentist.com/practice-growth, and we can book yourself in and we can find out how to scale your practice, how to grow your practice, and that way we can build out a strategy that's just right for you. But let's get on to the conversation about scaling up right now. So I think it's really important to define what scaling up is, because scaling up means different things to different people. To me, scaling up is really about helping you create leverage in your practice, and you can do that in a number of different ways. Of course, there is the multi-practice ownership model, and we have lots of practice owners in our group, the Savvy Dentist coaching community, that do that and do that really well. We've got people with 2 practices, 3 practices, 4 practices, and more. And then, of course, we've got other people that scale up by having lots of chairs under one roof. So it's a large single practice or large multiple practices. So rather than having small practices here, there, and everywhere, they might have one really large practice or even a couple of really large practices. Now, the advantage, of course, of having larger practices is you have the infrastructure and the fixed costs are contained, and you're not replicating that. So, of course, what I really wanted to talk to you about today was how do you transition from that growth phase where you're still in the business, you're still the one generating the income, you're still the one who is, the business is a bit key person dependent on you. What's that transition look like, and what needs to be in place to be able to do that? As I said, we've helped lots and lots of practice owners do this over the years. We know what works, we know what doesn't, and there's a couple of themes I want to share with you today, a couple of thought starters, a couple of ideas for you to consider as you go about your own scaling up journey. One of the reasons you might want to do this, of course, is to create wealth for yourself. And there's no doubt that if you scale your practice, you'll most definitely create material and financial wealth for yourself. We've helped lots of people do that. We've helped lots of people create millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of wealth. But I think the most important part of that journey is who you actually become. And who you become and what you're capable of and fulfilling your own potential is actually the real journey. We often focus on the commercial outcome or the material outcome, and as important as that is, I believe the real growth story is who we as business owners become in the process. How can we fulfill our own potential? How can we build something that stretches us, helps us develop our own capacity as leaders, helps us develop our own capacity as business owners, and indeed entrepreneurs as well. So what I really want to focus on in this conversation is the transition of how we go from having a practice which is key person dependent, where typically it's the principal of the practice doing the drilling, filling and billing, maybe with a few other people to support, to where we go to having that scalable, leveraged practice. And what's that transition look like? So there's a couple of things I want to share with you around that, and a couple of things that trip people up a lot that I just want to bring to your attention up front, and then we'll discuss a few key steps in scaling. So one of the things that trips people up is a lot of dentists are reluctant to take time away from chairside activities. They're reluctant to take time away from their clinical production because they become addicted to the income. And there's a great book, and I can't remember who the author is, but the catchphrase of the book is making money is keeping you broke. And it's exactly the same. If we constantly spend our time drilling and filling, and we regard any time that's not drilling and filling as unproductive, then we're never going to really scale. Because what happens for most most people is they do their dentistry by day, and then they're trying to find the time and the energy and the bandwidth to do all the other things outside of that, full clinical day. And all of us have a certain amount of energy. All of us have a finite amount of energy. And frankly, most of us don't do our best thinking, our best work, after a full day of patients. I don't know about you, but having done, a day of patients of back to back to back to back, having the energy, the bandwidth to think strategically about my business is just not there. Really, mistake number one is not taking time away from the chair to think strategically about your business, to focus on those business growth activities, the things that are going to move the needle and help you scale up. Now, some of those activities are really important. And of course, if you are going to take time away from the chair, we need to make it really productive. And really productive means developing your team. It really means focusing on how do you build a self-managing team? How do you create people that can think for themselves or indeed think like you, make decisions effectively? And how do we resource them so that they've got all the things they need to be able to do their job really, really well, to look after the patients on your behalf, whether that's a clinical role, such as being a dentist or even a dental hygienist or oral health therapist, or indeed a support role, whether it's being a dental assistant, whether it's being a front desk person or anything in between. We need to use the time away from the chair really productively. If we take time away from the chair and we go and have a cup of coffee or we check out Facebook or we do whatever, then I agree that is totally unproductive time and not the best use. And if you're going to use that downtime for those purposes, then by all means go back to doing clinical dentistry. But the consequence of that is that you won't scale up. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two, and this happens all the time, is we see people come and say, hey, Jesse, I really want to scale up. I want to have a practice that scales. But the problem that they've got is they haven't got enough demand in the engine already. And what I mean by that is, just to use a metaphor to explain it, is often when you want to scale up, it's like changing gears in a car. And if you're old enough to have learned to drive on a manual car, you'll know what I mean. You're listening to the revs in the engine. You're making sure that the engine is straining a little bit before you engage the clutch and change gear and then re-accelerate. Now, what happens though, if you're driving your car and you come to the traffic lights and you try to take off from the lights in fourth gear or something, the engine labors. And we see that when people try to scale up, oftentimes they're not quite ready to scale. They haven't got enough demand in the system. They don't have enough capacity being utilized to warrant the addition of further capacity. And what I mean by that is if you've got empty books or you've only got a few bits and pieces of patient flow, then it's going to be very hard to scale up from that. So we do need to make sure we've got demand for our services outstripping supply to a bit. We want to keep that engine revving pretty highly and then change gear. So what I'd really like to then talk about is what are a couple of key steps to think about as you do go on your scaling up journey, a few key things that we've observed having worked with lots of people. And of course, remember that scaling up is a process. It's not an overnight thing. And one of the things that I say to people is you've got to give yourself a couple of years to do this. I spoke to someone the other day and he's very new to practice ownership. And he was, I think maybe he'd been in his practice 6 or 7 months or something like that, not long. Really nice guy, really, really lovely fella. And he said to me, look, Jesse, we see, large CEOs of large corporations, scale their businesses and do really well. And they do that in a very compressed time frame. Why can't I do that? And of course, I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, and I'm all for fulfilling potential, but we've got to remember that the CEOs of those large organizations are seasoned business operators. They are seasoned professionals. So if you're new to practice or if you're new to the idea of scaling, we've got to understand that it is a process and it's not an overnight thing. That doesn't mean it needs to take longer than it ought to. Of course, we want to do it as quickly as possible, but it's not realistic to think that we're going to be scaling up overnight. And so I just want to make that point really clear. It is a process, and the process is repeatable. The process is predictable. And if you follow the things that you need to do, then you too will be able to scale up. But it's about doing the things that need to be done. So let's talk about some of those things that do need to be done. The first thing I want to talk about is team. And I've already kind of hinted at that. Really, our focus, if we're going to be scaling up, is how do we work through other people? How do we work through our team? And that means we've got to be able to develop that team. We've got to be able to help other people rise up and become really proficient and great in their role. And for us, that means taking time away from the chair and focusing it on how do we develop our people? How do we have structured mentoring systems? How do we have those processes in place so that we can train and onboard and bring people up to speed really well? So when we hire people into the practice, not only do we want to say, welcome, here's how we onboard you, share with you our vision, instill some of the values of the practice, with you, and so on and so forth. We've got to be able to get that person up to speed really quickly. And that means, they're going to join the flow of the traffic, to use that metaphor again. There's the on-ramp into the traffic, and we want to get people into that traffic and moving freely as quickly as possible. So that on-ramp really relates to onboarding and training. We need to be able to induct people into the business systematically and reliably every single time. And for every single role in the practice, we need to have a well thought out, well structured training program so that we are building skill and we're building knowledge. Now, this is going to require the building of assets in a business. And there's really a couple of different types of assets in a practice. There's really the intellectual property assets, which is what I'm referring to here. But there are physical assets such as, chairs, rooms, and so on. And then, of course, there's the database, the patient base, which is, an asset in itself. And then there's, cash and the team and so on. So what I want to talk to you about, though, is we want to build those intellectual property assets into the business so that we can build our people to be proficient and effective in their roles as quickly as possible. And what that means is we're going to end up with a team of A players, people who are good in their roles, people who know what to do, how to do it, and get on and do it, which we call a self-managing team, and who are great culture fits. So they share the vision of the practice and they share the values of the practice. And that's really where we get that great alignment, where we've got a great culture fit and, of course, high performers. So really, our role as the business owner shifts from being the guy or the girl that does great clinical dentistry to the guy or the girl that builds great people. And we want to help people learn to think like you so they can make the same decisions as you. And that means having a systematic process of onboarding, training, mentoring, and of course, managing our team members. So that's really one of the first things we need to be able to do in order to scale up. Now, the second thing we need to do to scale up is we need to be really mindful of what our scalable unit is. So let me talk to you about a scalable unit. This is something I've been thinking about for years in dentistry, and it really makes sense when you think about it. A scalable unit to me could be a practice. You could be stamping out practices all over town, and a lot of our practice owners, particularly in the regional areas, go for a strategy of regional domination. We have some people doing that in metro areas around different suburbs, but the whole idea of regional domination is you stamp out practices so that anyone looking to go to a dentist will go through or past one of your practices before they get to an alternative. And that works really, really well. So the scalable unit in that case is the actual practice. But oftentimes, if we just go a little bit smaller, the scalable unit is a dental chair. And we've then got to think about, well, if I've got a dental chair, what sort of staff do I need for that? I might need a dentist. I might need a dental assistant. I might need a fractional front desk person. Maybe I need to think about a stereo nurse or a fractional stereo nurse for every chair I add. What's that look like? And then, of course, we also need to look at how many patients we need per scalable unit as well. So we've got to be able to build the physical infrastructure, build the capacity, and then we've got to be able to fulfill that capacity. And so one of the things that we talk about is stretching that capacity, making sure, as I said, the engine's revving a lot before we add in the physical infrastructure. The physical infrastructure is one of the other assets that we want to build out over time, of course, but having clarity about capacity planning and what your scalable unit is going to be key and vital as you go through your scaling up journey. Now, the third thing I want to talk about is you as the business owner. It's important to understand that what got you here won't get you there. So working harder and harder on the same business model is not going to help you scale up. I've already alluded to the fact that we want to build assets, we want to develop team members, but of course we want to build ourselves in the process as well. And to me, business ownership is a bit like having kids in some ways. It's a wonderful journey of self-development. And what it forces you to do is to think differently, to think bigger, to grow, to develop your skill sets, to immerse yourself in a high-performance peer group, and to understand and to think differently about practice. It's about transitioning from having a dental practice to having a dental business, and that's a very key and important distinction to make. We're moving to having a dental business. And when we think about our business as a business, we think of ourselves as business owners, not practice owners. And there's a very important distinction there. When you're in a practice, so it's really about being dental centric, and it's about thinking ourselves as a dentist first and a business owner second. But what I want to encourage you to think about it is that I'm a business owner who happens to be a dentist. And when I'm a business owner, I think like a business owner, I act like a business owner, as compared to thinking and acting more like a clinical dentist. Now, that's not to say there's anything wrong with thinking and acting like a clinical dentist. I get that. We've all done that training and we're all happy with the profession that we're in, and we all love and are grateful for the profession we're in. But in terms of scaling up your practice, it's about some shifts in your mindset. It's about some shifts in your thinking, and it's about some shifts in your own development. And that means when it comes to those shifts, we want to talk about leadership. And we talk about 3 different levels of leadership. In the work that I do, we help a lot of people really level up their leadership. And that is one of the leading indicators for someone who's going to be scaling is how well they're able to level up their leadership. It's like the lead domino that knocks over the other dominoes. And so there's really 3 types of leadership, or 3 layers or levels of leadership, if you will. The first type of leadership is primary leadership. And in primary leadership, we've just really got to lead ourselves. As how do we show up? How do we turn up every single day? How do we interact with the world, and how do people experience us? The second type of leadership is really, the secondary type of leadership where we are leading other people. This is pretty common in a normal standard dental practice, one that hasn't yet scaled. We are leading a team. We're developing our own self at the same time. So we've got the primary and the secondary leadership happening concurrently. But if we want to scale up, then really we need to take our leadership to the tertiary level where we develop other leaders. And we are building people, we are growing people, and we are allowing ourselves to be one layer back because we've built a leadership team. And this is a really important note as well, is that in a scaled practice, typically you transition from being reliant on a practice manager to relying on a leadership team. You've now built other leaders, and those leaders form a leadership team. And it allows you to reduce the dependency on your practice manager, because goodness knows how many times we've had the conversation about what happens because Mary or Bob or whoever the practice manager is leaving the practice, and all the stress that ensues from that. If we build a leadership team, we allow other people to play to their strengths. We allow people to do what they do best and drive the business forward. It also reduces reliance on one person, and it allows us to bring in the best thinking from our team members and allow them to make decisions on our behalf so that we can free ourselves up for other higher value activities, strategic thinking, planning, and so on. So if you want to scale up your practice, yes, as I said, you will absolutely and undoubtedly enjoy commercial success. You will make millions of dollars. As I said earlier, we've helped lots of people do that. But the real journey is the internal journey. It's the inner game. Who do we become? How do we become the best version of ourselves? How can we be effective in our role? And I wanted to share a few things with you to help you on your scaling journey so that you can develop the tools, the resources, and the knowledge to be able to do that for yourself. And if that's something that you'd like to explore in your practice, then I'm going to encourage you to reach out. Let's have a conversation about that, about how to grow and scale your practice. And as I said earlier, all you need to do is come across to savvydentist.com/practice-growth. And we'd be happy to sit down with you and put together a strategy that takes into account where you are right now, where you want to get to, and the steps that are going to allow you to make the transition from where you are to where you want to get to. But that's it for me. Have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Savvy Dentist Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist Podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.